Welcome back to the Quilty Little Christmas Sew-Along. It's August 1st this week. We're starting the Sending Holiday Wishes quilt, and there's also a Sending Holiday Wishes quilt block. This week we're working on the Sending Holiday Wishes quilt block, the Snowflake Stamp, letter, stars, and stamps. Get all your fabrics cut, sorted, and prepped. Everything needs fusible on the back except for the little piece of glitter vinyl in with the stamps block. We're going to start with the Holiday Wishes block. This is a threadwork block. It's all embroidery with a little bit of background quilting at the start. 5x7 hoop size. I already have my light mesh cutaway loaded, hand tightened, screwdriver tightened. You should just have a piece of background fabric with your fusible. And for your batting, the final cut size for this block is 6.5 by 4.5, so cut your batting at 7.5 by 5.5. I'm using my own thread colors. I'll show you what I'll be using today. For the background quilting, you need to use the color cream. I'm using a brand called Sim Thread. I bought it online when I first started doing embroidery, and you get a whole bunch of colors, very budget friendly. The next color listed is olive green. This is what I'm using for olive green. Then we have dark green, I believe. Yep, dark green is next. I've changed the color I'm using for light pink. On our last project, this was the color I used, and you could barely see it. This is really, really light pink. I would probably call this pale pink. So I went to my thread wall and I pulled this instead for light pink. And then you need a color for forest green. I'm all set to head over to my embroidery machine. There's also one more thread color, which I didn't realize until I sat down at my machine because it's further down in the instructions. You're going to need red. This is the color I picked for red. I'm on a baby lock meridian. I'm using my own background quilting for this project. I don't have the Quilty Little Christmas quilting bundle. If you have the quilting bundle, you want to find KDQ 343 Christmas 14 4x6. I'm going to go into my Quilty Little Christmas folder, and I'm going to pull some background quilting. I need to find a 4x6. This is an embroidery heavy block. I don't want to detract from the embroidery. I'm going to pick something simple. I'm going to pick the loops. This came from Clear Blue Tiles. This is the block by block version. I need a 4x6. This will quilt out really fast. It's very simple loops. I'm going to go ahead and hit set. And now I have to hit add to add our block. We'll go back to our USB, look for Quilty Little Christmas, and then we're doing the Sending Holiday Wishes project. And I need the Sending Holiday Wishes 5x7 right there. Going to go ahead and hit set. And you can see the background quilting is in the background. I'm going to hit embroidery. We're ready to go. I have my cream thread loaded on my machine. We're going to start with our batting placement line. Grab your batting, make sure to completely cover that placement line. You can tape it if you like. It should stay in place. Stitch your tack down. Once the tack down is stitched, go ahead and trim everything outside of that tack down line. Once all that's trimmed, put it back on your machine. We're going to stitch our fabric placement line. Grab your fabric, make sure you cover that placement line. We're going to stitch our tack down line. This is a white fabric. Double check, make sure you've got no dark threads, dog hair, or if you've got cat hair, anything like that underneath. And then stitch your tack down line. Don't trim this right now. Next we're going to stitch our background quilting. Go ahead and switch to whatever color you're using for olive green. Put that on, and we're going to stitch the pine needles 1 accent. Switch to dark green and stitch out the pine needles 2 accent. Grab your light pink and put that on. We're going to stitch the branches fills. Switch to forest green and we're going to stitch out Sending Holiday Wishes. Go ahead and change to red. We're going to stitch out the star fills. This Block is all done. We'll trim all our blocks together at the end. I'm going to go ahead and take this out of the hoop and we'll get set up to do the Snowflake Stamp block. We're moving on to our Snowflake Stamp block. The final cut size for this block is 4.5 inches square, so cut your batting 5.5 inches. You should have fusible on the back of both your fabrics. I'm going to go ahead and show you my thread colors. We're doing the background quilting with sage green. This is the color I have picked for sage green. You're also going to need dark green, deep red, and light pink. If you're using the background quilting per the instructions, you need KDQ 345 Wavy 9 4x4 design. I need to go find a 4x4 design. I'm back at my machine. I already have all my files pulled up. I need to find background quilting. I looked at my snowflake blocks from the previous project, and I had used what's called radial lines. It's a block by block design that I pulled from the Oh So Delightful quilting package. I think I'm going to use that. One thing about this block, we're going to have the background fabric and then this applique piece in the middle. And remember, this is going to be trimmed, so there's not going to be a whole lot visible around the outside. This radial lines is nicely balanced around the edges and even in the center. See how these 1, 2, 3, how these 4 stars are centered? So if you end up seeing it through this applique fabric, it should balance out nicely. Cross your fingers. I'm going to select that in the 4x4 size. I'm going to hit set. I'm going to hit add. I need to pull up the Snowflake Stamp block from Quilty Little Christmas. And we're in the Sending Holiday Wishes project. And here's my Snowflake Stamp. Go ahead and set that. Now I have an idea of what that's going to look like. That looks really good. See how these all center around the outside? I'm going to go ahead and hit embroidery. I already have my sage green on my machine. The first several steps are going to be exactly the same as the block we just did. We're going to stitch our batting placement, put the batting down, tack it down, trim it, fabric placement, place your fabric, fabric tack down, and quilting. I'm going to run all of those together to music, and then we'll do the applique step together. I broke a needle. I don't know if I've ever done that on this machine. I actually just put on a new needle. The quilting is done and it blends right in with the fabric, which is great. You shouldn't see it standing out through the applique. The next thing we're going to stitch is a square. That's going to be our placement line for our applique. I'm going to leave the same color thread on for now. I need to cover my square with my piece of white fabric. Make sure fusible is down, fabric side is up. Sometimes it's hard to tell with the light colored fabrics. Then we're going to stitch the tack down line. Trim your fabric that's outside the tack down line and switch to your dark green thread. Once you've got it trimmed and you've switched your thread, we're going to stitch the Stamp Scalloped Satin Outline. This is a good time to check your bobbin. We just did a lot of stitching with the other block, and this Stamp Scalloped Outline and the Snowflake is a lot of stitching, so if your bobbin's running low, switch it out. Make sure you trim it. I don't know if you watched the previous videos, but the other one that had the velveteen, I forgot to trim it. Once it's trimmed, and once you've got your new thread on, stitch the Stamp Scalloped Satin Outline. Switch to deep red. We're going to stitch out the 25 cents and the Snowflake Fill 1. I did figure out why my thread broke. On my machine, you load your thread and you've got this little spool cap like this. The thread got wrapped around the rod, so as it was feeding through the machine, it was pulling and wasn't going anywhere, and it snapped the needle. So be careful with your little spool caps. Switch to light pink, and we're going to stitch out the last step, which is Snowflake Fill 2. This is all stitched out, This color that I picked for the light pink shows up much better. I'm going to go ahead and take this out of the hoop and we're going to get ready to stitch the letter block. We're moving on to the letter block. We do need pink thread. Mine's already on the machine. We're doing sage green. They've got a light orange yellow for the star on the Christmas tree. I'm going bright yellow. And then we're going to need our dark green. I have everything ready to go. This is another one that can be done in a 5x7 hoop. All of the blocks we're doing today can be done in a 5x7 hoop. We are back at the machine. If you're using the background quilting for this, you're going to need KDQ 346 Christmas 16 4x6 vertical. So I need to find a 4x6 design since I'm using my own background quilting. This is another block where we're not necessarily going to see a lot of the quilting. This is all fabric, this big piece of pink. The only quilting we're going to see is outside around the edges. Looking at the final project, I've got loops on this block, the Sending Holiday Wishes, and the radial lines on this block. So for this one, I don't want to do loops. I'm thinking this block in the corner, the gift, I'm going to do the radial lines and it'll kind of balance off of this. So I need to pick something different for this that's not radial lines or loops. On here I have Christmas tree, which is Christmas trees, but I know where I want to use those, so I'm going to skip that. I'm going to skip the loops. I'm going to skip the radial lines. I've got swirls and winter. Let's look at swirls. Those are what the swirls look like. Very simple. Here's the 4x6, so you would see just a little bit around the edges. And then let's look at the winter. Here's my 4x6. Again, I'm just going to see a little bit around the edges. So the nice snowflake detail, everything's going to get lost. And it's swirls and snowflakes. I might as well just do the swirls. It's easier. It'll go faster. So I'll be doing the swirls background quilting for this. We'll go ahead and set that. And then we're going to add our block. Now we're ready to go. I have my pink thread on my machine. I'm going to go ahead and set the beginning to music. It's the same thing we've been doing. We'll do our batting and our fabric, and then when we get to doing some of the applique, I'll slow down. My background quilting is done. We're going to go ahead and stitch our fabric placement line. Grab your envelope fabric, cover up that placement line. You can tape that if you like. Trim off the fabric that's outside of your tack down line, and then we'll stitch the satin outline. I'm using the fabric kit for this project, and even with the fusible, you can see the other fabric through the back. You can see it more like that because I've got the lighting from the embroidery machine. But even without the lighting, you do see the plaid coming through. If that bothers you, maybe use a heavier fusible on the back so you don't see it. I'm not worried about it, just pointing it out. I'm going to put this back on the machine and we'll stitch the satin outline. My satin outline is stitched. I thought it was recording and it wasn't. Oh well, that's okay. Let's go on to the next step. We're going to switch to the sage green and we're going to stitch out the Santa Claus, Santa Village, and the North Pole. You have a choice for the next steps. I have the embellishment kit. I actually pulled everything already and didn't realize this button completes this block, so I'm done. If you're doing this with stitching, you're going to stitch the little square for your fabric placement, and then you have a fabric tack down. You'll trim outside the square, then you'll use your pink thread. It'll stitch out the tree trunk. Then you've got your sage green for the tree. Then your yellow, that little tiny dot, is the star on top of the tree. And then the dark green is the satin outline on the stamp. That's it. We're all done. Our next block is the stars block. We're going to need our pink thread. And then we have a section where we're using a neutral color. So I've got a neutral color thread right here. And then the light pink, which I've been using, and red. Back at the machine, I think I know what I want to do for my background quilting. There's a great picture right here in the book. We just did the letter and I used the swirls. I have loops here. I'm going to use swirls for this one. On this one, which we did, I did the radial And then I'll do the radial stars down here too. And then when we get to the filler blocks, which are here and here, I'm going to use a Christmas tree. Let's load our files to stitch out our stars. Let's pull up that background quilting. If you're using the background quilting with this project, you want KDQ 345 Wavy 9 2x6. So I need to find a 2x6. I'm going to use the swirls, 2x6. Go ahead and set that, and let's add our block. We are ready to go. I'm going to start with my pink thread on my embroidery machine, since that's the first thread we'll be using for our quilting. Again, I'll go through the batting placement and everything up until the background quilting. I'll fast forward and set that to music. And this block has some applique. We'll work through all of that together. Background quilting is done. We're going to change to our neutral thread color, and we're going to start working on our applique. Once your thread's changed, we're going to stitch the pinwheel 1 placement lines. Grab your pinwheel 1 fabric, and you want to cover all of these placement lines. If you get your fabric centered inside of this tack down, you'll easily cover the placement lines. And it does show using a little piece of tape, so let's go ahead and tape that. And we're going to leave on the neutral thread. We're going to stitch the tack down lines. Once everything is tacked down, we've got to do some serious trimming. You want to leave what's inside of the stitch lines. Go ahead and trim everything outside of the lines. I've got everything trimmed. That took a bit of time. We're going to stitch the pinwheel 2 placement lines. Grab your pinwheel 2 fabric. Make sure you cover those placement lines. Go ahead and add that piece of tape at the top just in case. We're going to stitch the pinwheel 2 tack down lines. Go ahead and trim everything outside of the tack down lines. Once you've got that trimmed, you need to stitch out the pinwheel 3 placement line. Place your pinwheel 3 fabric. You can add the tape at the top. I need to not add it so low. Last time I had the tape and it got caught in the tack down line, which was fine. I was able to pick it out. It just took a little longer. Get that set and tape down and do the pinwheel 3 tack down line, and once that's done, trim everything up just like before. Once everything's trimmed, we're going to use our light pink, pink, and red and stitch outlines on all the parts of the pinwheel. I did make a thread change because the colors I had for light pink and pink were very close together. I'm going to keep the light pink as is, and I pulled a different color for pink because it's going to go around that mid-range pink color here. This is a better match than the color that I had picked, so I switched to this. I also wanted to be sure there was a difference visually between these two colors. My original light pink and pink were so close they almost look like the same color. I'm going to change my thread to light pink, and we'll stitch out the pinwheel 1 satin outlines. Once the pinwheel 1 is stitched out, switch from your light pink to your regular pink, and we're going to stitch out the pinwheel 2 satin outlines. You'll notice that the pinwheel 2 outline only stitched on one side. That's because we're going to change the red and stitch the pinwheel 3 outline. That'll go around the red, and then we're going to go back to the pink, and then it'll stitch out the last part of pinwheel 2. Grab your red thread, change your thread. Once your red is stitched out, switch back to your pink. We're going to stitch the last pinwheel 2 satin outlines. We're all done with this block. One thing I did notice with all of the heavy fabric overlay and the applique, it did seem like my needle was sticking a little bit. Right now I have a regular Schmetz needle on there, these 7511 needles. Somebody suggested in the comments, and thank you very much, on one of my other videos to try a non-stick needle. I ordered some non-stick needles. They're 8012. I'm going to switch out to one of these needles because our last block today, the stamps block, has some applique and heavy stitching. We'll see if this makes a difference. We're moving on to the stamps block. You're going to need your cream color, red, deep red, light and dark pink, and I did change my needle to this Schmetz 8012. I showed that at the end of the last clip, but in case anybody didn't see that, I'm going to see if the slightly larger non-stick needle helps. This is also in a 5x7 hoop. If you have the embellishment kit, this has a piece of the glitter vinyl in it. Let's head over to the machine. Let's get our files loaded. If you're following the quilting bundle, you'll be using KDQ 346 Christmas 16 4x6 vertical design. I'm going to use the swirls design for this. I need to find a 4x6. Not very much is going to show. This has two big pieces of applique and they're going to cover that quilting. Let's go ahead and add the embroidery file. I need the stamps block. And we're ready to go. Make sure you have your cream color on the machine. I'll go ahead and run through everything until we finish the background quilting and we're getting ready to start our applique, and then I'll slow it down. Apparently I forgot to film the tack down line, but it's tacked down. Trim, you know what to do. Once your quilting is done, if you're using the glitter, it tells you to peel the plastic off the glitter. I had to get tweezers to get that started. So peel that off. Throw away the plastic. Set your glitter aside, and we're going to be working with a neutral thread, which is already on my machine. I'm going to stitch the Stamp 1 placement line. Grab your Stamp 1 fabric, that's the cream color fabric. Make sure to cover that placement line. I've got a little piece of tape on there. We're going to go ahead and tack that down. I'm going to trim away this extra fabric. Once I do that, we'll stitch the Stamp 2 placement line and we'll put our Stamp 2 fabric on top, tack it down, and trim that. Make sure your cream color is on your machine. We're going to stitch the Stamp 2 candy cane stripes, fill 1, and then when that's done, you'll change to your red thread and stitch the Stamp 2 candy cane stripe, fill 2, and there's a bow placement line. Once your candy cane is all stitched out, our next step is to stitch the bow placement line, and that's in the red. We're going to grab our glitter and a piece of tape, cover that placement line, and tack this down, glitter side up. There's a side that feels really smooth, and the glitter side you can feel the texture. If you're not using the glitter, use a piece of red fabric or red felt. If you have any Fairy Frost fabric, that's a fabric line by Michael Miller. It's got a sparkle to it. That will look really nice for this. So go ahead, place that, make sure you've covered that placement line, push down your tape, and stitch the tack down. Once your tack down line is stitched, go ahead and get your tape off, and then you need to trim. This is going to be a raw edge applique, so that means there's not going to be a detail stitch around the outside. Once you have it trimmed, they tell you to press the glitter with a pressing cloth for 15 to 20 seconds, so plug in your iron if you haven't already. And what I use for a pressing cloth is just a scrap piece of white cotton fabric. So you put your pressing cloth on top, and then go ahead and press it with your iron for 15 to 20 seconds. Don't do this with your iron, just set it down, count to 15, and you're done. Once you've got that trimmed and pressed with your pressing cloth, keep the red thread on. We're going to stitch the Stamp 2 25-cent detail. Change to your deep red. We're going to stitch the bow loops fill and the scallop satin outline. Those are the last two steps for this part. This block has some long stitch outs. The next thing we're going to stitch is on the next block in the deep red color. It's called Stamp 1 Quilt Block Fill. Before I stitch that, I'm going to get a look at my stitching with that new needle. Looks the same on the outside. Uh-oh, got a little problem there. The bow I'm not very happy with. Do you see that? I still have a little bit of white popping through. The rest of it looks okay. This is kind of messy. Wow. I even cleaned my machine and double checked to make sure I had the correct bobbin and everything was seated correctly. Kind of bummed about that, but At least it blends in, you won't see it, and when it's hanging up, you'll never notice it. Let's go ahead and stitch the Stamp 1 quilt block fill. Once the quilt fill has stitched out, you leave the deep red on and stitch the word joy. I sat here and I watched it. I cleaned everything again. I checked my needle, I checked my thread, I cleaned my thread path. I'm still getting some white poke through. It's fairly minor. I decided to email the dealer where I bought the machine and ask for advice. We'll see if I get a response before the end of this video. If not, I'll include it in the next one. Let's stitch out the word joy. Switch out to your light pink. We're going to stitch out the 25 cents. And putting in a full bobbin, we're going to change to our regular pink color, not the light pink, and we're going to stitch the satin outline. Once your threads change, we're going to stitch the Stamp 1 scalloped outline. I went in and looked at the speed on this machine. I just got this machine a few months ago, so everything was cleaned and ready to go, and factory settings. It's been running on max speed. I slowed it down. We'll see if that has an effect on this satin outline, because we can compare it right from this one to this one. I've got the same brand thread, same weight, different colors, but it'll be a good comparison. Let's try that. Here's the pink stitching. Here's the red. See the problem there on the red with the white poking through? The pink looks good all the way around. I probably needed to slow down my machine. It was going kind of fast. This one is done. Let's go trim all our blocks. It's time to trim our blocks. I've got my rotating cutting mat. Most of these we can trim with the orange pop rulers if you have them. The first one needs to be trimmed to 4.5 by 6.5. That's this size right here. You want to line up your ruler with the lines on the quilt block. And then for the smaller ones like this, I like to put the next size around it. It gives me a little bit more space for my hand to hold onto the ruler. We'll do this first one slow together. In case you've never used the orange pop rulers, you cut on the inside, this side. Normally if you're right-handed, you cut on this side. For these rulers, you cut on the opposite side. You take your blade, put it in the groove, push it as far over as you can. I shifted my rulers there, sorry. Slide that back, got that straight. Put it right here into this notch at the bottom. Push it as far over as you can, that direction. And then just go ahead and cut, and it'll go up into the groove at the top. And we're going to go all the way around. And there's our first block. I like to take these and put them back in their bag, keep myself organized, keep the blocks clean. Let's do the next one. Our Snowflake Stamp is going to be trimmed to 4.5 inches square, and I gotta tell you, this background thread blends right in with my block. It's almost easier to do that from the back, huh? I don't want to mess it up though. We'll go ahead and line this up, and the orange pop rulers come in square and rectangle. I will put all that information in the description box below. Smallest size, next size up for my hand, and we're going to trim it the same way. The letter block is going to be trimmed to 4.5 by 6.5. The stars block is going to be trimmed to 6.5 by 2.5. I have a 6.5 inch square ruler. I'm going to start with the 6.5 part. Now I'm going to trim the 2.5 inch. I have a 2.5 inch wide ruler. And you'll feel when you're using these regular rulers, the ruler pops because of all of this applique in all of the stitching. That's why those orange pop rollers are nice. They sit and they go around all of that stitching. Makes it a little bit easier. I have to press down pretty hard to make sure it doesn't slide. Our stamps block is going to be trimmed 6.5 by 4.5. Gives me another chance to look at this stitching after I slowed down my machine. I think that was a big component of that. It's amazing how much better that looks than the red next to it. Go ahead and line that up and trim your block. There's all the blocks we just did. Just so everybody knows, I did this over a couple of days. I don't sit there and do marathon embroidery and do this in one day. Make sure you take breaks. Don't get rushed. Don't worry, don't hurry. It all comes out great in the end. Let's take a look at what we're going to do next week. We'll be working on the gift block, the mailbox, 4 filler blocks, and then we'll finish this project. This project does not have any borders. It's right here, so we don't have to do any borders for this one. I have this scheduled to finish at the end of August, but again, don't rush. Go at your own pace. The videos will remain up. Thank you so much for joining me again for the Quilty Little Christmas quilt along. Don't forget, trim your jump threads. I just noticed those. Check for jump threads. Put your blocks back in your bag. Take a break, and I'll see you next time.